Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tales, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The rain had been falling since early evening, tracing slow rivers down the window pane. In the dim room, a single lamp glowed a small circle of amber light on the wooden desk. A cup of jasmine tea rested beside an open notebook, steam rising and curling like faint whispers in the air. The scent of rain mingled with the tea, soft and familiar, like a memory that had forgotten its edges. I had stopped pretending to be busy hours ago. There was nothing left to rearrange, no messages to reread, no new tasks to fill the silence. Only the sound of rain, steady and kind, holding space for all the things I hadn't said. She used to love nights like this, rain against glass, the low hum of the city dissolving beneath the weather. "It sounds like forgiveness," she once said. I never understood that until now. Forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't come with explanations. It's quiet, almost shy. Like rain falling on empty streets when everyone's gone home. The clock ticked gently in the corner. I noticed how it didn't rush either. Every second seemed to breathe, to stretch its small moment of being alive. I wondered if that's what peace feels like, not the end of longing, but the soft acceptance of it. On the shelf sat a photograph of her in a wool coat, standing beneath an umbrella I had lent her years ago. The print had begun to fade, but her smile hadn't. It was the kind of smile that didn't ask for anything. Just being near it once had been enough. I looked away, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. That surprised me. There was a time when her name felt like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. Now it was just hers, a sound belonging to another life, another weather. Outside, the rain shifted heavier now, then lighter again, as if it too was learning to breathe. I thought of how many nights I had spent waiting, as though time owed me an answer. Waiting for her call, her message, her apology. But maybe the rain had been trying to teach me all along that not everything that disappears is lost. Some things just go quiet. The lamp flickered once. I poured the last of the tea, its warmth thinning, but still enough to hold between my hands. The cup was chipped on one side. She had dropped it once and laughed. I had meant to replace it, but never did. Now, somehow, it felt right to keep it that way. Imperfect things have their own kind of truth. I wrote her name once more in the notebook, not for closure, not even for memory, but simply as a way of saying goodnight. The ink spread slowly, bleeding into the paper like the rain outside, softening at the edges until it was no longer clear where the word began or ended. The air smelled of wet leaves and warm wood. I leaned back, eyes half closed, listening. The rain, the clock, my breath, they seemed to agree on one thing. I didn't have to wait anymore. Not because she would return, but because I had finally arrived here, in this quiet room with the rain and with myself. And as the night deepened, I realized something simple and kind. Waiting had been my way of keeping her close. Letting go, perhaps, could be another way of doing the same. The rain kept falling. The world kept turning. And I, at last, was still. Waiting used to feel like love. At least, that's what I told myself. Every small act of text left unread, a coffee growing cold, the sound of her name in the back of my mind became proof of how much I cared. But love that waits too long slowly turns into something else. A habit, a rhythm, a quiet ache you start to mistake for breathing. There was a time when each morning began the same way. I'd reach for my phone before my glasses, blinking through the blur to see if her name had appeared overnight. Sometimes it had. A brief morning or still awake. Small, ordinary words that felt like rescue. Other days, nothing. Just the glow of the screen, white and indifferent. I learned how to build entire stories around silence. She must be busy, I'd think. Or she's probably asleep. It was easier to invent reasons than to face the truth that maybe there weren't any. The mind is generous like that. It'll keep giving you comfort long after the heart has stopped believing it not at work. I'd find her in small details, the color of someone's scarf, the curve of a letter in a handwriting similar to hers. I began saving photos I never sent, songs I never shared, notes I never finished. My phone became a museum of half conversations and unsent tenderness. There's something strangely sacred about saving what never found its place. Maybe because it lets you believe that nothing was wasted, that every message drafted and deleted still counts as love in some hidden way. I started timing things around her. How long it took for her to reply. How long it had been since we last spoke. How many days since she'd said my name. I counted without meaning to, as if numbers could hold what feelings could not. Waiting had become my language, but there were moments, brief and unexpected, when I saw myself from the outside, like watching a man standing at a bus stop long after the last bus had gone. I knew the world was moving. I just couldn't convince my feet to follow. I remember one evening in particular. The city was soft with fog, lights bleeding into puddles on the street. I walked home past the cafe where we used to meet. The window seats were empty, except for a young couple laughing quietly over shared dessert. I wanted to feel envy, but all I felt was tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from work or sleeplessness, but from holding on to something that never moved with you. That night, I sat by the window again, the same one that now framed my solitude. The rain came and went. I thought about how long I had been waiting, and for what? For her to come back? For an explanation? For proof that what we had meant something more than just passing comfort. The truth was simpler and harder. I had been waiting for time to rewind to, before the silence, before the distance, before I learned that even love can fade quietly. But time doesn't turn back. It drifts forward, carrying you whether you want to go or not. I think part of me knew that, even as I checked my phone one last time before sleep, even as I saved her photo in a folder called Someday. Waiting had become my habit. Yes, but maybe it was also my way of staying gentle with myself. A way to keep believing that love, even when unanswered, still meant something good. The lamp hummed softly beside me. The air smelled faintly of rain again. And I found myself whispering her name, not to call her back, but to remember how it once felt to hope Dot, and in that quiet, I began to understand something I hadn't before. Waiting wasn't weakness. It was love practicing how to let go. The cafe on 7th Street still stood, though time had softened its edges. The sign above the door had faded. The color of the awning was no longer the deep red I remembered, and yet the scent of coffee and cinnamon drifted out exactly the same way it had years ago. Some places, it seems, carry memory like breath. They exhale the past each time the door opens. I hadn't planned to go there. My feet just moved without permission, guided by something quieter than thought. The rain had started again that afternoon, a fine mist that turned the air into silver. I pulled my coat tighter and stepped into that familiar warmth. The bell above the door chimed, delicate and low. A few people sat scattered across the room, their faces hidden behind mugs and books. The same song played faintly from an old speaker. The same wooden floor creaked beneath my steps. I chose the corner table by the window, our table. She used to sit across from me there, hands cupped around her drink, shoulders relaxed, her gaze somewhere just beyond the glass. We never rushed conversations in this place. We let silence speak as easily as words. The waitress approached, smiling politely. I ordered jasmine tea, out of habit more than taste. She nodded, left, and the quiet folded itself back around me. Outside, raindrops slid down the window, catching reflections of passing umbrellas, red, blue, yellow. a moving sea of small shelters. I remember the night we sat here when the city lost power. The whole street went dark except for this cafe, lit by candles and laughter. She had said, "Maybe light shines brightest when everything else forgets to." I'd written that line down once, thinking I'd use it someday. Turns out, I just needed to remember it. When the tea arrived, I wrapped my hands around the cup, feeling warmth seep into my palms. Steam blurred the view, softening the outlines of the world. I wondered, not for the first time, what she might be doing now. Whether she still stopped by cafes like this, or if she had outgrown the kind of quiet we once shared. The chair across from me was empty, but it didn't ache the way it used to. It simply was. A space once filled, now breathing freely. I thought of all the conversations we never had, the apologies, the explanations, the questions that once felt urgent. How strange to realize none of them mattered now. Time had answered them all in its own language, the kind that requires no words. The rain outside grew heavier, and for a moment, I imagined she might walk in. The bell would ring, she'd shake the water from her coat, her eyes would find mine, and we'd smile in quiet recognition of everything we'd survived separately. But the door stayed closed. The bell stayed silent, and that, somehow, was all right. I took a sip of tea. It was slightly bitter at first, then gentle, leaving warmth at the back of my throat. A lot like love, I thought. Not every sweetness lasts, but even the bitterness teaches you how to taste again. Across the room, a young couple shared a slice of cake, laughing softly. I watched them without envy. I saw instead the familiar rhythm, the way she leaned forward, the way he listened. Love always starts that way, tender and unguarded. I wished them well, quietly, from across the room. When I finally stood to leave, the rain had eased into drizzle. I placed a few bills on the table, tracing my fingers once more across the old wood. The grain was worn smooth where countless hands had rested, as if holding years of unspoken stories at the door. I turned back for one last look. The lamp above the window cast a warm halo over the empty chair, the untouched napkin, the fading ring of tea on the table. It no longer looked lonely to me. It looked peaceful. I stepped out into the rain. The air was cool. The city lights blurred through the mist. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for her shadow to follow. I just walked slowly, steadily, letting the rain erase my footprints as I went. And somewhere between the rhythm of the drops and the quiet hum of the street, I realized something gentle and whole. Not every love ends. Some simply find a new shape in memory. The day she didn't arrive began like any other quiet, gray, and promising rain. I remember waking early, too early, pacing between the window and the clock, rehearsing in my mind the things I might say if she came. It wasn't supposed to be a dramatic meeting. Just coffee. Just two people talking after a long silence. I had chosen the same cafe on 7th Street, of course. It was our place, and I had thought somehow that the familiarity would make it easier. The table by the window had been empty when I arrived, the light outside soft and diffused. I ordered jasmine tea again, because waiting felt incomplete without something warm to hold at first. I watched the rain, then the door, then the rain again. Minutes passed quietly, collecting themselves into hours. Each time the bell above the door chimed, my heart startled like a bird. A woman in a yellow coat, a man with a briefcase, a child holding an umbrella each shape, became her for half a second before dissolving back into someone else's life. I told myself she might be late. The bus, the traffic, the weather, there were always reasons. But when the rain began to soften into mist and the light outside turned silver blue, I knew. The knowing wasn't sharp, not like disappointment. It was slow, almost tender, like the way day turns to evening without anyone noticing the exact moment. She wasn't coming. And strangely, I didn't feel abandoned. I just felt. Still, the waitress, the same one who always worked weekends, came by with a kind smile. "Another cup?" she asked. I nodded. The steam rose again, fragrant and calm. Outside, the street reflected the pale glow of lamps, stretching long ribbons of light across the wet pavement. I sat there long enough for the teapot to cool, for the cafe to empty, for the rain to stop. In the silence that followed, something inside me shifted. I realized I had spent so long imagining what I'd say to her that I had forgotten how to listen to myself. I thought I needed her to bring closure, to fill the gap between what we were and what we had become. But there, in that empty seat across from me, I saw something clearer. Closure isn't a gift someone else can give. It's a quiet permission we give ourselves to stop asking why. I left a small tip on the table, enough to cover the second pot of tea, and stepped outside. The air was cool against my skin, carrying that clean scent that follows every rain. The street was empty, except for puddles catching reflections of passing cars. I started walking, not quickly, not toward anywhere particular, just walking. Every step felt lighter than the one before. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was something gentler, a kind of peace that comes when you finally stop bargaining with time. I passed by the park where we once sat on a bench and watched the city lights come on. The bench was still there, slick with rain. I imagined her sitting beside me, the ghost of her laughter floating somewhere in the damp air. But even that didn't hurt. Memories had softened, like photos that fade at the edges, but still keep their light. By the time I reached home, night had arrived fully. The window glowed faintly in the distance as I climbed the stairs. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and old books. The lamp hummed quietly on the desk, and I realized this small, quiet room was where I had always been meant to return. I hung my coat by the door and listened. The rain had started again, gentler this time, as if to keep me company. That was the day I stopped waiting for her. Not because I stopped caring, but because caring had changed shape. It no longer looked like checking the clock or searching faces in the crowd. It looked like sitting in the calm that remained, letting absence speak in its own language. And in that language, I heard something new. Not goodbye, not regret, just a soft truth whispering through the rain. You're free now. There are many kinds of silence. The one that used to live between our pauses was fragile, full of hidden things. But the silence that came after she left was different. It had weight. It pressed against the air like mist before dawn. I used to fear it, used to fill it with music or noise, with endless scrolling and half-written thoughts. But slowly, over the months, I began to see that silence wasn't empty. It was a kind of teacher. Her silence, especially, had its lessons. It taught me that love doesn't always need to be spoken to be real, and that sometimes the most honest thing two people can do is to stop trying to explain what already faded. At first, I kept trying to decode it, every delay in her messages, every phrase that sounded colder than the last. I thought meaning still lived in the pauses. I searched for signs, for proof that maybe she was thinking of me too. But the more I searched, the quieter it became. Until one morning, I opened my phone and realized there was nothing new. No message, no answer, no continuation of the story I'd been writing alone. That should have felt like loss, but strangely, it didn't. It felt like clarity. The silence had stopped being her absence. It had become my mirror. In it, I could finally hear myself again, my breathing, my small hums as I moved around the kitchen, the sound of the spoon against the cup. Ordinary things, but I had missed them while waiting for her echo. I started walking more. There's a path near the river where the city quiets down, even on busy days. The first time I went, I kept my headphones in as if I still needed her voice somewhere in the background. But soon I took them off. I let the real world speak again, the splash of rain on leaves, the creak of wet branches, the rhythmic tapping of drops on my umbrella. Each sound felt like a conversation I'd forgotten how to have with myself, with the day, with life. One evening, I found a small bench under a chestnut tree. The rain had just stopped, and everything glowed with that silver stillness that follows a storm. I sat there, watching the ripples on the water fade. For a moment, I wished she could see it too, the way the sky turned soft gray, the way the world looked rinsed clean. But the wish passed gently, without ache. I think that was when I understood forgiveness, not the kind that fixes anything, but the kind that no longer needs to. Her silence had once hurt, because I thought it meant rejection. But over time, I saw it for what it was, an ending spoken kindly. She didn't owe me answers. She didn't owe me closure. And in that realization, I found something deeper than both respect. We had loved as best as two people could at that moment in their lives. And then, as people often do, we outgrew the version of ourselves that fit together. There was no betrayal in that. Only time, quietly doing what time does. I came home that night soaked from the mist, my coat dripping onto the floor. The lamp was still on. I made tea, sat by the window, and listened to the faint patter of the next wave of rain. The silence filled the room again, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt like company steady, breathing, alive. I realized I didn't need her words anymore to understand her part in my story. She had already spoken through the space she left behind. And in that space, I had found myself again. Silence, after all, isn't an absence of sound. It's the presence of everything you've learned to stop chasing. I looked out into the rain, its rhythm soft and unhurried, and smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't wish for her to break the silence. I wished only for it to stay a little longer. Evening became a ritual, though I never planned it that way. It began with the sound of rain brushing against the window, a quiet invitation to slow down. I'd light the small lamp on the desk, the one with the fabric shade that glowed like honey. Then I'd set out 3 small things: a cup of jasmine tea, the chipped ceramic plate she once teased me for keeping, and the old notebook where I'd stopped writing letters and started keeping reflections. Instead, tea, lamp, window. 3 simple things that built a small altar to calmness. I didn't pray there. I didn't ask for anything. I just sat, watched, breathed. The way the tea steamed into the air reminded me that warmth doesn't last long. But it doesn't need to, it just needs to be noticed. While it's here, sometimes I'd open the window a little to let the scent of wet earth drift in. It smelled like the world remembering itself. The city below murmured softly tires on wet asphalt, a door closing, a train in the distance. Each sound carried a strange tenderness, the kind that lives only in places that have known both noise and quiet. The lamp flickered once as if reminding me how fragile light can be. But fragility, I've learned, doesn't mean weakness. It means the courage to exist, knowing you could go out at any moment. I think that's what love was too, in its truest form, a steady flame, trembling but present. I used to think healing would arrive with fireworks, with revelation. But it came slowly, almost imperceptibly, folded inside evenings like this. There was something sacred about repetition, the same rain, the same desk, the same cup. Routine, I realized, is how the heart remembers safety. Sometimes I would speak softly to the air, not to her, not even to memory, but to the quiet itself. Thank you, I'd say, though I couldn't have told you what for. Maybe for staying. Maybe for teaching me how to dot. There were days when the rain didn't come, when the sky stayed clear and the air felt too still. On those nights, I'd miss the sound, the gentle percussion, that told me life was still moving, even when mine felt paused. I'd pour the tea anyway, light the lamp anyway, and wait for peace to show up in another form. It always did. Sometimes it came as the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sometimes as the soft ticking of the clock. Sometimes as my own heartbeat, slow and even. I'd catch myself smiling without reason, and that was enough proof that peace had become something I could hold. Once, a friend called to ask how I was doing. I almost said, "Still waiting," out of habit, but the words stopped on my tongue. I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. Quietly, deliberately, beautifully. The room had changed too. Small plants now lined the windowsill. The photograph that once made me ache now simply made me remember. I had even replaced the old candle she gave me, not to forget her, but to make space for light that was mine alone. There's a saying I once read, "Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life." I understood it now. Healing, for me, looked like this little ritual tea cooling beside the lamp. Rain whispering outside, my reflection soft in the glass. I leaned closer to the window one night, breath fogging the pane, and traced a small circle with my finger. Just a simple gesture. But it felt like writing a promise. To stay gentle. To stay open. To stay kind, even to the parts of myself that once only knew how to wait. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. The candle burned low. I took the final sip of tea and closed the notebook, whispering a quiet goodnight to no one in particular. The room exhaled. The silence settled. And I realized that in tending to these small altars of ordinary things, I had been rebuilding my life piece by piece, one sip of tea, one quiet breath, one evening at a time. The first time I stepped outside into the rain without an umbrella, it felt almost like rebellion. For years, I had watched storms from behind glass safe, dry, untouched. But that evening, something in me wanted to feel it again. Not the memory of her, not the ache of what was gone, but the simple touch of water meeting skin. The street shimmered under the lamplight, slick and glistening like a living thing. Puddles caught reflections of passing cars, and every drop that fell seemed to hum its own small note. I stood there for a while at the threshold, listening. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant thunder. Then I stepped out. The first few drops hit softly, tentative, almost polite. Then more came, tracing lines down my face, my neck, my hands. I tilted my head back and let the sky fall freely. The sensation was electric, not in a thrilling way, but in a grounding one, as if the rain itself knew my name. For a long time, I had avoided moments like this. Rain used to remind me of her, the way she'd press her palms against fogged windows, the way she'd laugh when wind tugged at her coat. But that night, she didn't appear in the memories that drifted through. It was just me and the weather, sharing an uncomplicated silence. I walked aimlessly, my steps slow and unhurried. The world had turned softer under the rain. The edges of buildings blurred. Streetlights melted into gentle halos. Everything looked forgiven. I passed by the park again, the same one we'd once sat in, and the bench was still there, glistening with water. I didn't sit. I just paused, my reflection rippling faintly in a puddle nearby. It was strange to realize how different I felt standing in the same place. The ache that once lived in my chest had quieted. I didn't need her ghost beside me to make the world feel full anymore. The rain deepened, becoming heavier now, and I laughed quietly to myself. It had been so long since I'd felt that sound leave me without effort. I stretched out my arms, palms open, letting the drops strike and gather. Each one felt like a small absolution, as if the sky were washing away old versions of me I no longer needed. Down the street, an old woman in a yellow raincoat hurried past, smiling when our eyes met. "You'll catch a cold," she called, her voice warm and teasing. I smiled back and said, "Maybe, but it's a good night for it." She laughed and disappeared around the corner, leaving behind the echo of simple human kindness, the kind that doesn't demand to be remembered. As I kept walking, my shoes squelched against the pavement. My clothes clung to me, heavy with water, but I didn't mind. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, steady and alive. For so long I had measured time by waiting. Now I measured it by steps. Each drop that touched my skin seemed to loosen something small and invisible. A knot in the chest, a thought I didn't need to finish, a question that no longer required an answer. The rain didn't cleanse me. It didn't erase the past. It simply reminded me that I could stand in it and still feel whole. When I reached home, I left my wet coat by the door and sat by the open window, hair dripping, breath slow. The city lights shimmered through the mist, blurred and beautiful. The rain had changed rhythm now, falling softer, like a lullaby. I realized I had stopped thinking of her name somewhere between one street and the next. Not on purpose, it just drifted away, replaced by the sound of rain filling all the quiet spaces she used to occupy. That was the night. I learned peace doesn't always arrive in stillness. Sometimes it comes in motion, in walking through the rain without needing to shield yourself from it. Outside, the last drops fell from the eaves, one by one, steady as a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and listened. The world, for once, felt exactly as it should be. There came a day when I decided to gather the things that had quietly kept her ghost alive. Not to throw them away in anger, but to give them a resting place. To return what was never really mine. It was a Sunday, pale and calm, with soft rain pressing against the windows like fingertips. I brewed a pot of tea and laid everything out on the wooden table, the scarf she'd once left draped over a chair, the concert ticket we never used, a small envelope filled with pressed jasmine petals from the night we walked home together. Each item felt like a sentence from a story that had already ended, one I kept rereading long after the final page. I sat down and touched each thing slowly, as if saying their names. The scarf still smelled faintly of her perfume amber, soft and low, a scent that always made me think of late evenings and whispered laughter. I remembered how she had wrapped it around my neck once when the wind cut too sharply. I smiled at the thought, then folded it carefully. The concert ticket had faded, its print barely visible. I ran my finger over the words and thought of that night, the way she'd fallen asleep halfway through the film we watched instead. Her head against my shoulder, rain against the window, the world outside dissolving into blur. I had kept that ticket thinking we'd go someday, but someday had passed quietly, years ago. Then there was the small note she once left in a book I lent her. "You always underline the sad parts," it said. "Maybe someday you'll find the happy ones too." I hadn't noticed the note until after she stopped coming by. I remembered reading it with a strange mix of ache and affection, as if she had left me a secret task. Maybe I was finally completing it now. I placed each item into a wooden box lined with soft cloth. No ceremony, no music, just the rain to witness. There was no need to burn anything or throw it away. Letting go, I had learned, didn't have to look like destruction. Sometimes it looked like care. When I was done, I tied the box closed with a thin ribbon. It felt like tucking a chapter into its place on the shelf, still part of the story, but no longer the one being written. I placed it inside the cabinet, beside old journals and forgotten keepsakes from other lives. The room felt lighter afterward, as if it had been holding its breath with me and could finally exhale. The rain had softened into drizzle, the kind that sounds like paper being turned. I poured another cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, a group of children ran through puddles, their laughter clear and bright. For a moment, I envied their freedom, the way they could run straight into rain without thinking of what it symbolized. Then I realized I had done the same just nights before. Perhaps we're all children again when we remember how to let go. I thought of her, not with longing, but with gratitude, for the laughter that once filled my small apartment, for the warmth of shared mornings, for the way her presence taught me what attention truly means. She hadn't taken anything from me. She had left me with gentleness I didn't know how to hold until now. I raised the cup slightly, as if toasting the air. "Thank you," I whispered, the words soft enough that only the rain could hear. And just like that, the act was complete, not an ending, not even closure, but a quiet gesture of respect to the love that once lived here. The scarf, the ticket, the note, they no longer waited for her return. They rested finally the way memories should. The lamp hummed beside me. The window blurred again. The tea cooled, but its scent lingered and somewhere in that stillness, I realized returning what was never mine didn't mean I'd lost anything. It meant I finally had room to belong wholly to my own life again. For a long time, I was afraid of emptiness. It used to feel like a punishment, like the absence of sound after a song you loved ends too soon. I filled it however I could, with music, with work, with the hum of background noise that kept me from hearing myself think. But the more I tried to escape it, the louder it became. Until one day, I decided to stop running and simply sit with it. That evening, the sky was gray in the way only autumn skies can be dim, weightless, almost tender. The rain had paused, leaving drops trembling on the edges of leaves outside my window. The room was quiet, except for the low buzz of the lamp and the rhythmic beating of my heart. I sat down, hands empty, and let the stillness unfold around me. Not at first. The emptiness felt uncomfortable. My body wanted to move, to reach for the phone, the radio, anything to fill the air. But I stayed. I listened to the silence, the way you might listen to a language you don't yet understand. Slowly, something shifted. The quiet began to stretch wide instead of close in. I could feel the space around me breathing. I realized then that emptiness wasn't asking to be filled. It was inviting me to notice what remained. There was the faint scent of tea on the desk, the coolness of air against my skin, the memory of laughter that still echoed faintly, not hauntingly, but like the hum of a familiar song in another room. Even emptiness, it turned out, wasn't truly empty. It held traces of life, subtle, tender, and waiting to be seen. I thought about how much time I had spent fearing this space, how I'd mistaken quiet for loneliness and solitude for loss. But maybe this was what healing actually looked like. No big realizations, no cinematic epiphany. Just learning to sit with what's left until it stops feeling like what's missing. I stood by the window and looked out at the world. The street was wet, shining under the first hints of evening light. A cat darted across the sidewalk, shaking droplets from its fur. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. The sound was faint, but it reached me all the same. I pressed my palm to the glass, felt the cool surface beneath my skin, and smiled. The reflection looking back at me no longer seemed like a man waiting. It was someone arriving, someone who had learned to be at home in the quiet. There's a peace that comes when you stop trying to fill every silence. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in slowly, like dust in a sunbeam, like rain pooling softly in a forgotten corner of the street. I sat back down and let the thought wash over me. This emptiness isn't something to escape. It's something to live with, to decorate even. In the days that followed, I found myself cherishing these moments. The spaces between work and rest. The stillness before the rain began. The long pauses where nothing happened, and yet everything felt alive. I stopped reaching for the phone the second I felt alone. I started lighting candles instead, or simply breathing, letting the quiet shape the room. When friends asked how I was doing, I said, better, And for once, it wasn't just a polite answer. It was the truth. Not the loud kind of happiness, but the kind that hums quietly beneath everything steady, patient content. That night, I fell asleep with the window slightly open. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp leaves. I heard the soft rustle of branches, the faint drip from the eaves, the sound of life moving gently through the dark. I understood then that the heart, too, has its own seasons. There are times of blooming, times of waiting, and times of stillness that look like nothing but are everything. And as I drifted to sleep, I thought maybe this is what it means to stop chasing closure. To sit in the quiet, unafraid. To look at the empty space she left and finally call it home. I used to believe every story needed an ending. Maybe that came from all the books I grew up reading, the ones where the final chapter always wrapped everything in a neat, satisfying bow. Lovers reunited, promises kept, lessons learned. But real life rarely gives you that. Some stories stop mid-sentence. Some fade out without a final word. And some, like ours, end so quietly you only realize it later, when you reread the moments and find the last one already written down. It took me a long time to understand that unfinished doesn't mean broken. It just means human. For months after she left, I kept revisiting the same scenes in my mind, as if rearranging them could change the outcome. The coffee that went cold between us, the half-smile she gave when she said goodbye, the way her shadow stretched across the street as she walked away. I used to think if I replayed them enough times, I'd find the missing line that would make it all make sense. But the truth is, there wasn't one. Some things just stop, and maybe that's all right. One evening, I found myself back at the river path. The rain had ended hours ago, but the air still smelled of it, clean, metallic, alive. The pavement gleamed under the streetlights, and my reflection followed beside me, calm and unhurried. I thought of her for a moment, then of all the people who had once been important in my life and drifted away. Each one had left something behind, not objects, but lessons. From her, I'd learned gentleness. From another, forgiveness. From yet another, the beauty of leaving when love turns into longing. Each name, each story, had been part of my becoming. I stopped by the bench under the chestnut tree and sat. The wind carried the faint murmur of the river, and I let it speak for a while. If closure had a sound, I think it would be this water, finding its way forward without effort, without needing to prove where it came from. I took out my notebook, the same one that once held all my letters to her, and began to write not about her, but about now, about how endings can be gentle, about how you can carry someone with you without carrying the pain. Some chapters close themselves, I wrote. And maybe that's the kindest thing they can do. The words came easily this time, not forced or heavy. It felt like breathing after a long walk uphill. I realized I didn't need a reply, or an explanation, or even a goodbye. All I needed was the quiet understanding that what we shared had mattered, and that it didn't need to last forever to be real. When I closed the notebook, I looked up at the night sky. The clouds had thinned, revealing a faint scatter of stars. I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked at them without searching for meaning. Tonight, I just looked. They were beautiful, distant, and complete shining, not because they needed to, but because that's what stars do. Maybe love is like that, too. As I walked home. The city lights shimmered against puddles, turning the streets into ribbons of gold. I passed a window where someone was laughing, a sound so genuine it made me smile. Life was still happening everywhere, unbothered by the stories that had ended. Back home, I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the rain start again, soft, unhurried, familiar. The drops traced paths across the glass, just like before, but I wasn't waiting for anything this time. Maybe closure doesn't arrive at the door. Maybe it comes as peace slipping quietly into your routine like rain returning to the window, or your own reflection smiling back without sadness. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered a simple goodbye into the quiet. Not to her, not even to the past, but to the version of me that thought everything needed to be finished to be whole. The rain answered softly, tapping against the glass as if agreeing, and for once, that was enough. I didn't notice exactly when it happened. One evening just slipped into another until, somewhere between one rain and the next, I realized I had stopped counting steps. For years I had measured my days by movement, how many times I walked from the chair to the window, how often I checked the street below, how long it had been since her name appeared on a screen. Those small rituals of waiting had once felt like devotion. Now they were simply gone, like breath fading from glass. That night was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you speak softly even when you're alone. I lit the candle on my desk and watched the flame settle. Its light painted the walls in slow, breathing gold. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and unhurried. I thought of how many storms I had watched through that same window, how many versions of myself had stood there expecting something to return. This time, I stayed in the chair. I didn't look out. I didn't listen for footsteps. I just listened to the candle's small hum and the steady rhythm of the rain. It was enough. It's strange, the way peace arrives not as a revelation, but as a quiet absence of urgency. My heart no longer leapt at the sound of a message. My mind no longer replayed her voice. I hadn't forgotten her. I'd simply stopped needing her to appear in order to feel complete. I poured myself a cup of tea, the same jasmine I always kept for nights like this, and let the steam fog my glasses. I smiled at the small absurdities of it all, how something as ordinary as breathing, drinking tea, watching rain could feel like starting life again. For a while, I thought about the younger version of me who had once sat here, restless, waiting. I wanted to tell him that it would all make sense someday. That time would soften what hurt. That love doesn't disappear when it ends it, just changes rooms inside you. I took a sip of tea and let that thought linger. The candle flickered low. Shadows wavered across the walls, like quiet waves. I imagined her somewhere far away, perhaps watching her own rain, living her own ordinary peace. I didn't need to know. The beauty of not knowing, I realized, is freedom. I turned off the lamp and left only the candle burning. Its small flame mirrored the rhythm of the rain rising, falling, steady again. I whispered into the half-dark, "I'm all right." The room didn't answer, but the quiet itself felt like agreement. When I finally stood, it was not to check the window or the clock. I just moved slowly to the bed, the wooden floor creaking softly under my steps. I blew out the candle, and the room filled with darkness and the lingering scent of smoke and tea. The rain outside continued its gentle tapping, a sound both familiar and new. I lay down, eyes open to the faint light through the curtains, and thought, peace is not something you find. It's something that finds you when you stop pacing. And so, I let the rain count for me. 1 drop to 100. Each one falling into the rhythm of a night that no longer needed waiting. There was a morning when I woke up and realized that I hadn't dreamed of her in weeks. For a moment, that realization felt strange-like, noticing a scar has faded without remembering when it stopped hurting. I lay still, listening to the faint patter of rain on the roof, the distant hum of traffic, the kettle beginning to sing in the kitchen. The world was moving forward quietly, and so was I when I sat by the window. The street below glistened under the soft drizzle. The trees shivered gently, their leaves shining silver in the early light. I cupped my tea, warm against my palms, and let the day unfold without the weight of remembering. I used to think healing meant forgetting, that to move on, you had to erase every trace of what came before. But now I knew better. Healing, I'd learned, was about remembering differently with needing it to hurt Dot. There was a time when my morning started with, what if? What if she called? What if I'd said something different? What if we'd met again by chance and started over? Those what ifs were like shadows that lingered even after the light had changed. But this morning, they felt far away. I thought about them endless maybes and could-have-beens and felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Each one had been a bridge that carried me closer to acceptance. Without them, I might never have learned how to sit in uncertainty without fear. I whispered softly, as if to the rain, thank you for everything that didn't happen. The words felt honest, gentle, whole. I turned my gaze to the window again, where drops gathered and slid slowly down, joining others before disappearing into the sill. The sight made me think of all the moments I'd released tiny, quiet, gone before I even noticed. Love, it seemed, was made of many small disappearances. And maybe that's what made it sacred. On the desk lay the notebook I'd filled over months' pages of reflections, small sentences written late at night, not for her anymore, but for me. I flipped it open to a random page and smiled at what I saw. A short line, written on a rainy day not long ago. Peace feels like the space where love used to ache. I read it again and felt the truth of it settle deep inside. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A few yellow leaves loosened and spiraled to the ground. I watched one land softly on the wet pavement and thought how graceful letting go can be when you stop fighting gravity. Sometimes, I still caught glimpses of her in a stranger's laughter, in the scent of cinnamon, in a passing melody on the radio. But they came like ripples now, not waves. They didn't pull me under. They just reminded me that something beautiful had once been here. As the morning stretched on, I decided to step outside. The air smelled clean and alive. I walked slowly through the narrow streets, the rain brushing lightly against my coat. The city felt kind today. Even the puddles seemed to shine in a softer light. For a long while, I simply walked, not to reach anywhere, but to keep moving. The world had its rhythm again, and I had finally learned to move with it. When I returned home, the candle from last night still sat by the window. A small curl of wax dried along its edge. I lit it again, watched the flame grow, and felt the room warm. I realized, as I sat there watching the rain, that I wasn't saying goodbye anymore. I was saying thank you to her, to the waiting, to the long ache that had turned into stillness, to every version of myself that had learned to stay gentle through it all. Love had left its traces. Yes, but they no longer asked for closure. They asked only to be honored. And so, with the rain soft against the glass, I whispered one last time, not to the past, but to what remained. Thank you for teaching me how to be alone without feeling lonely. Outside, the leaves drifted down the quiet street, each one landing softly, perfectly where it was meant to. Morning arrived softly, wrapped in the gray hush of rain. The first light filtered through the curtains in thin, silvery lines, dusting the room with a gentle calm. I woke to its quiet presence and sat up slowly, the familiar rhythm of drops against the window like an old friend, whispering good morning. There was something different about this morning, though something subtle, almost imperceptible. The room felt larger, lighter, as if every breath I took had more space to settle in. I went to the kitchen, barefoot, the floor cool beneath me, and put the kettle on. Steam rose, the same way it always did, curling into the air like a promise kept. As I poured the tea, I noticed how still my hands were. No tremor, no hurry. The small motions stirring the cup, carrying it to the window, setting it down carefully felt sacred, like a quiet ceremony. The kind that requires no audience, only presence. Outside, The city was waking. People in raincoats hurried along the sidewalks. Umbrellas bloomed like small shelters of color. The bakery across the street opened its doors, and I could almost smell the fresh bread mingling with the rain. These were the same streets I had walked through for years, the same window I had looked out of countless mornings. And yet, everything seemed new because I was new. I took the first sip of tea. It was warm, familiar, comforting. I realized it was the first morning I had truly tasted it, not thinking of her, not reaching for her shadow, not measuring the silence she'd left behind. Just the taste itself, earthy, floral, alive. I smiled. It was small, but it reached my eyes. For so long, mornings had been heavy with expectation. Each sunrise carried the weight of what-ifs and unfinished thoughts. But today, there was no waiting, no searching, no quiet ache in the chest. Only this, the hum of the kettle cooling, the steady beat of rain on glass, the world moving forward and me moving with it. I thought of her name, and for the first time, it didn't echo. It simply passed through, like a leaf floating down a stream. I didn't cling to it. I just watched it drift away. Yet it's strange how healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, in small shifts, the way your hands stop reaching for the phone, the way a familiar song stops hurting, the way you wake up one morning and the air feels lighter. There's no grand moment of victory, just gentle peace settling into the corners of your life, patient and kind. I finished my tea and leaned my forehead against the cool glass. The rain streaked down in silver threads, blurring the outlines of the world. I used to think blurred things were sad proof that I'd lost clarity. But now I understood that softness has its own truth. The world isn't always meant to be sharply defined. Sometimes peace is found in the blur. The sky outside was still gray, but it wasn't gloomy. It was soft, forgiving. I watched a sparrow land on the edge of the balcony, shake the water from its feathers, and take off again small, ordinary, miraculous. And I thought, maybe that's all life asks of us, to keep showing up, even in the rain. I sat there for a long time, letting the day unfold without needing it to be anything more than what it was. There would be work later, maybe dinner with friends, maybe another walk through the drizzle. Ordinary things. But they no longer felt like distractions from something larger. They were the larger thing. The quiet beauty of simply being here. When I finally stood to leave the window, I glanced back at the reflection the glass offered me. I didn't see a man waiting. I saw someone quietly at peace, someone who had made room for the light to return. The rain kept falling, slow and endless. I whispered to it, half laughing, half awed, "You can stay as long as you like." And in that moment, I knew the day no longer belonged to her name. It belonged entirely to me. Night fell gently that day, as if the sky itself wanted to rest. The rain had softened to a fine mist, more like breath than weather, drifting across the window in slow, tender strokes. I left the lamp on low, its light spreading like warm honey across the walls. The air smelled faintly of tea and candle wax home, in the quietest sense of the word. I moved slowly, almost ceremonially, as I prepared for bed. The simple act of folding the blanket, placing the cup in the sink, turning down the light, each one felt like a small acknowledgement. I made it through another day, peacefully. When I lay down, the sound of rain became my heartbeat. Steady, gentle, real. It had always been there. Through all the versions of me, the one who waited, the one who hurt, the one who healed. The rain had never changed. Only the way I listened had. I thought of her, not as someone lost, but as someone who had once walked with me through the same storm. We shared a road for a while, and then our paths divided, as all paths eventually do. There was no tragedy in it anymore, only gratitude. She had taught me what tenderness felt like, and what it meant to keep loving the world even after someone leaves. The window shimmered faintly with reflections of the city below, gold and blue lights swaying in the puddles. People crossing streets with umbrellas tilted toward the wind. Life went on, quietly, beautifully, unbothered by who stayed and who didn't. I turned onto my side, facing the soft glow of the candle. Its flame wavered in rhythm with the rain, small but certain, refusing to be put out. I smiled at that. Maybe we're all just small flames in the storm, learning to stay steady, learning that survival can be gentle. A thought drifted through me, not heavy, not searching, just truth. Closure hadn't come, but peace had. And maybe that was better. Closure wants explanations, reasons, neat endings. Peace asks for none of that. It simply sits beside you and says, "You're okay now." The rain outside grew slower, more deliberate, like the world exhaling. I let my breath follow it, long and easy. I could feel my body sinking into the warmth of the sheets, into the weightless comfort of now. Tomorrow would come. The sky would clear. The light would change. Life, as it always does, would go on. But tonight, this sound of rain, this quiet, this heartbeat was enough. I whispered a few words to the dark, though I wasn't sure who they were for. Wherever you are, I hope the rain sounds gentle too. Then I closed my eyes. The candle flickered once, its reflection dancing faintly on the glass before settling into stillness. Peace arrived not as a grand revelation, but as a soft presence, a warmth at the edges of the cold, a calm within the noise. It didn't erase the past. It simply held it with kindness. Outside, the rain continued, patient and endless. Inside, I drifted toward sleep, the world fading to the rhythm of its fall. And somewhere, beneath the sound of water touching earth, I understood. Closure doesn't always come. Sometimes, peace does.